Did Trump give us any more information on tariffs, on next steps, on where all this is going?
Well, a little bit, Christina. The president did not rule out extending this 90-day pause if he is still negotiating with these countries and still potentially trying to strike a deal. But he also said that he would not extend the pause just for the sake of it, or try to get a deal just for the sake of it. That's what the White House is trying to stress today, that after days of mixed messaging, the point is of all this is trying to strike a deal. Now, interestingly, the president was asked to comment on the drop in the stock market today. He said he hadn't seen it because he had been in that cabinet meeting for 2.5 hours. He was also asked about one retaliatory measure that China took today. Listen to his response.
Mr. President, China retaliated today by reducing the number of American films that can be shown there. What's your reaction to them now targeting cultural exports from the United States?
I think I've heard of worse things.
So there you see the president laughing that off. Earlier in the day, we heard from White House officials that said that there are about 15 countries that are in active negotiations right now. Still unclear whether they will be able to come to any sort of deal. But this comes after the administration, had been saying that 1.50 at 1.75 countries had reached out. This morning, we learned in terms of active negotiations, just 15 at this point, Christina.
All right, from this cabinet meeting to Capitol Hill, Ryan, I want to ask you, what is the future of this budget blueprint that was adopted today? What are the next steps? Do we know where it's going?
Well, it's a long process still, Christina, and there could be many pitfalls that congressional Republicans face along the way. They basically just have an outline, a sketch right now of what their goals are on spending and the cuts that they'd like to make. But even those are not necessarily those targets that they hope to ultimately hit. Republicans in both the House and Senate would like to make cuts in the range of $1.5 to $2 trillion, which is not what it specifically spells out in this budget resolution that they passed here today. But the Speaker of the House, the Senate Majority Leader, have essentially given a pinky swear to these House Republicans in particular that want to see those steep cuts, that when the final reconciliation package comes to bear, that those cuts will exist. Now, that's not going to be easy because they also have to pass what they're hoping would be a $4.5 trillion extension of the Trump tax cuts. They've promised that they're not going to touch the benefits to entitlement programs like Medicaid. It's really hard to make that math work and do so in a way that doesn't blow a huge hole in the deficit. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. They got over this step, but many House Republicans are already saying that they were willing to do this because it's not final and not binding. But when the actual final product comes to bear, they want to see those steep cuts. And if they don't, there'll be a no vote. So the Speaker and the President both have a lot of work still to do, Christina.
Yeah, when it comes to cutting without touching those entitlements, the math isn't really mathing, as the kids would say. Ashley, I want to dig into this with you because Speaker Johnson barely got this blueprint over the finish line, and 2 Republican holdouts still voted no. Do you think Johnson can accomplish all of the agenda items Trump wants with this small of a congressional majority? We heard Johnson say earlier today the president was hands off. He let him handle it. He let him wrangle his own party. But do you think he can get this done, or do you think he's going to face even greater opposition down the line?
Again, some of this is unknowable, but what's striking to me, what people in the president's orbit have told me, is that because Trump now, just to go back a little bit, has sort of executed a complete takeover of the Republican Party, that when there is a moment like this where he needs people on Capitol Hill, and I'm talking about the president now, not Speaker Johnson, to do something for him, or he wants to lean on them, a lot of these, almost every single person at this point has a personal relationship with him. Many of them fear him, and a significant number believe that they owe their actual seat in part to something he did on their behalf in the primary, in the general election, some sort of support. And that has proven effective up until this point. But again, I think the question you're asking and the question for Speaker Johnson is we are seeing now the limits of that. And it's been interesting to see some of these House Republicans reassert traditional conservative values, which is not just adding and adding to the debt and deficit, which have really fallen by the wayside in Trump's takeover of the party until right about now.
And Annie, the White House is also trying to frame this tariff pause as essentially a win. Do you think that's going to fly? Are people going to buy that? Or is the U.S. still going to take a loss from this policy, even if it was only in place for a couple hours?
The tariff pause is not really a pause. The tariffs, as announced yesterday, are not materially smaller than the tariffs that were announced last week. This is an 145% tariff on China and a 10% tariff on every single other American trading partner. We have new numbers from the Budget Lab at Yale this morning that estimates in the near term, this is effectively a $4,400 tax hike on every single American household. So if you're in a world where the economy is already slowing down, this is going to have a profound effect on consumer spending and a profound effect on tens of thousands of American businesses.
And that pause also did not apply to those pre-existing tariffs on things like auto imports. Those are still in place as well. Ashley, so Trump's handling of this rollout and then reversal was not well received by the markets and even by some of his supporters. Here's how CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Leisman put it. Have a listen.
I remember the night before the tariffs were imposed and the day and that day, and I asked our great White House reporter Megan Casella why we had heard nothing of the plan. And the reason I asked is it because they don't know or they're not saying? And what we found out since is they didn't know. The plan was made up that day. It was not nobody on Wall Street. They didn't run it by Wall Street. They didn't run it by business leaders and CEOs. And now you could argue, after withering punishment from markets, from bond markets, trillions lost across the globe, the president, he didn't just flinch, but he ducked when it came to what was coming his way here.
I mean, the White House in turn is kind of implying that maybe this was the plan all along. They've focused on these deals. Countries are coming to us. They're saying they're making deals. Lots of deals. They're going to get better deals. You know, is that enough spin, do you think, to get most of his supporters to stay on the Trump train? Or do you think this is going to be in the back of people's minds, especially in the financial sector? And they may be going along for the ride, but, you know, they're keeping one eye on that little chart that shows you where the exits are.
Right. Well, the White House's spin is certainly this is the art of the deal. This is the master. But that defies credulity when not just from our inside reporting at The Atlantic and elsewhere, but just from watching the public facing facts. What's interesting is this is one of the first moments, and we're still early into Trump's return to power, that has really felt like his first term, right? With the chaos, with the infighting, with the aides behind the scenes, you know, scrambling to convince a president to do something they want him to do, to avoid something they believe could be catastrophic. You have Elon Musk attacking, you know, a trade guru for Trump, Peter Navarro, publicly. Again, these were all hallmarks of the first term, which, as Trump himself and his team and advisors would say, was not a well-oiled machine. So do Trump supporters stay on board? I think it's a little too early to tell. But what's interesting is you're hearing from a lot of these voters and people who represent these voters who maybe voted for a Democrat for Senate or governor and the president for president in 2024, that there's real concerns and that this is already starting to trickle down, as Annie has written in The Atlantic, to small businesses, right, where uncertainty is a problem for them and who they fear that we're going to do this all again in 90 days after this pause. And maybe again and again and again until his term is up. And that's not good for small businesses. That's not good for the markets. That's not good for certainty. And that's not good for the president's credibility.
Annie, can you talk to us about what that uncertainty does for the market? I mean, I was reading that people now who are businesses, they're trying to put in their purchase orders for holiday shopping, for, you know, their big time when they sell a lot of goods. And this uncertainty it's paralytic for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. But overall, you know, as you just heard Ashley talking about, if we're going to be back here in 3 months, what does that kind of uncertainty do to the market? And what does it do to America's place in the fabric of the international financial system?
Absolutely. When you talk to business owners, manufacturers who understand that the White House wants them to reshore manufacturing, essentially say that that would be so expensive and difficult to do that they would rather wait out the Trump administration than do it in some cases. Smaller businesses, retailers are figuring out how much to stockpile, what countries to buy from. Countries that use parts and products that are produced in China are figuring out ways to ship those items through second countries like Vietnam in order to avoid the China tariff, it is chaos. And every single business owner that I have talked to that works with any kind of imported part or imported good is doing the same thing. It's making it extraordinarily difficult for them to figure out their math for this year. And many of them are delaying hiring or even letting workers go simply because this is such an impossible problem to figure out. The notion that this is going to happen again in 90 days or whenever Trump decides it will is contributing to that uncertainty. It is impossible for business owners to effectively manage their businesses in this environment.
And Annie, quickly before I let you go here, we heard Gabe talking about this cabinet meeting, and during the cabinet meeting, Trump said he wants to make a deal with China. He thinks he can make a deal with China. But if you're looking at, a game of protracted economic chicken between the U.S. and China, who wins, or rather, who loses worse?
It's really a situation in which everybody loses. Foreign countries have no idea what the Trump administration wants from them in many cases. He's violated 14 free trade agreements. He's about to undergo simultaneous negotiations with more than 90 of our major trading partners and trading blocs. It's going to be very difficult to do. And we've seen really nonsensical demands. Is the point to raise a lot of revenue? Is the point to stop drug trafficking? I don't think that people really know. Is the point to eliminate all of our bilateral trade differences? Those are all completely different policy objectives. And so I think that if you have something that you're negotiating for, you need to put out what that is if you're going to have a good faith negotiation. And I think that we saw in the first Trump term that, they renegotiated NAFTA and created the USMCA. It was largely just NAFTA. It was the same thing. There wasn't a sense of what we really wanted. And so we had this period of disruption and a lot of tariffs, and we ended up with mostly the same policy. I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happened this time, except on a much grander scale.